I'm Bill Cook from the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension in Greenlee County. And today we're going to talk a little bit about container gardening, containers and soils. So one of the finest examples of container gardening is the nursery industry. They do a lot of containers. So what actually makes a container? Well, a container has to be large enough to hold the volume of soil needed for the plant, and it has to have drainage. And you notice these nursery buckets drain very well. So this is what makes a container. There's a few more little things at home that will matter to you, besides the fact it needs to hold enough soil for the plant and drain well. Something that does not blow over easily in the wind is important. We might want something that looks just a little bit nicer than that. So first off, let's talk about the soil. You have to understand when you're growing things in containers that containers dry from the top down. Now this is going to influence your soil choices. You can go down to the nursery and you can buy bags of potting soil for specific uses, but you'll find that they're not good for everything. So because containers dry from the top down, you'll find that certain soils, because some soils are very dense and some are very porous. The porous soils will dry faster. The dense soils dry slower. And what that means to you in a container is, say we put the same soil in all three of these containers. Let's say that soil dries to a depth of 2 inches, maybe 3 in a day when it's hot. So that means that this large container, if it's filled to here, is going to dry to that depth. Whereas this container, if it dries 2 inches, it dries to that depth. If this container dries 2 inches, it drains to that depth, maybe half of the container. So the object is to keep the right amount of soil, of moisture and air to support plant growth. So this container with a heavy soil will dry that far. The bottom is going to remain moist, soggy all the time. Now if that is too soggy for the plant that you're growing, the roots will not grow down there because it's just too dang wet. Which means that now we're utilizing this zone of the soil. So this one drains down 2 inches. It's not quite as soggy on the bottom. That might be pretty darn good. This one here dries a little further. It might dry too much, where you'll only be using this part of the soil. So with a fluffier, more porous soil mix, it'll dry down a little bit further, drains faster, and the bottom does not turn into a quagmire unsuitable for plant growth. So that's one of the things to consider when you're choosing the soil for your containers. And when you're choosing containers, drainage is everything. There's a couple of other little points that over the years that I have learned. This is a real dandy of a pot. It's beautiful. I love it. Looks great sitting out front. But the issue is, because of the shape, when I have to get a plant out of that, because it's getting root bound, it's nearly impossible. And I've resorted to laying it on the side and blasting it out with a garden hose and everything else. And you can see the repairs that I've made on this pot. So I found a real simple solution. I put my plant in a bucket like this that fits inside. So I've got a pot in a pot. Whereas commercial nursery buckets are tapered, meaning it's easy to take the plant out, do a little root pruning, pot it up to a larger size, whatever, and I've not broken this pot. When you're using terracotta, you'll find that this is a real handy method because terracotta, being porous, absorbs water And in the winter time, when it freezes outside, if you live where it freezes, the terracotta begins to erode because of the freezing and the thawing process. So here's another example. Some pots that look really nice, but it's extremely difficult to take a plant out of them. And yet another. So this is how I deal with it, and it works out pretty darn well. And what I really like about that is that I can put frost hardy plants in the same container in the winter, and I can take them out and replace them with other plants in the summer. So I can keep some color. I even have carried it as far as having flowering plants in the greenhouse and switching them out to have some flowers all the time. So that's the deal on pots. Some places where you go to buy pots, most places they come with a hole in the bottom for drainage. You can find pots that do not have a hole for drainage, and I have found something like this without a hole in the bottom makes a real nice saucer. So if you're putting it in your house or if you're putting it out on the patio, you won't have a mess. So that's the rundown on containers, and now we'll talk about soils.